All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mindgasms. So, I am Andrew, aka Christian Atheist Feminist Mindgasms, for the purposes of this video. And I'm going to do another video on the book called Less Than Nothing by the famous Hegelian slash Lacanian slash Marxist philosopher named Slavoj Zizek. And I'm going to discuss this paragraph where he's talking about how Christianity is feminist, basically, and the feminization of God and Jesus, and also Lacan's idea of Jesus as a psychoanalyst, and also connect that to a clip about him talking about how Christians are atheists. So I'm going to talk about that clip first, and then I will get into the paragraph from Less Than Nothing and comment on it a little bit there. Here we go. All right.
Let me propose to you a paradoxical statement. If you ask today, majority of people, they would have probably said in Europe, yeah, in some sense, we are Christian. Then if you ask them, but Christianity means a certain set of theses. Do you really believe that 2000 years ago, a guy was walking around in Palestine who was God? 15%. They did in Slovenia. Maybe we are a perverted nature. You know what I mean? Read the book by, I think it was Pierre Vidal-Naquet. Did the ancient Greeks believe in their gods? Where he demonstrated that it's clear that belief in practice means something else. They were not stupid. They didn't think if you climb on the top of Olympus, you would see there, I don't know, Zeus screwing Aphrodite or whatever. It's not, it was
Yeah, so I think this is interesting because I think it seems like by Christians being atheist, he means that today they're the religion that is closest, that sees the idea of a God as closest to the conception of the way they were seen in ancient Greece. Like ancient Greek gods were seen as metaphorical, and they didn't believe that they literally exist. They were symbols for very useful ideas and moral lessons for life. So, in that way, Christianity, the way it's seen today in particular, is seen as atheist in the same way by many Christians, because most, even apparently according to some studies in some countries, even the majority of atheists don't think that Jesus literally actually existed as a divine being, although some people, especially militant atheists like Sam Harris, who massively oversimplify Christianity and act like every Christian is an evangelical, which is fucking stupid. He acts like every Christian literally believes that Jesus was divine and Jesus was God. But depending on where you are, actually basically almost everywhere, and depending on you are in some places, the majority of Christians do not actually literally believe that Jesus was divine and that Jesus is God. They're kind of just lax cafeteria Christians or Catholics or something like that, or like they say they believe things like but they don't really, or they just use Christianity as a useful way to improve their lives, and they will believe some of the religious aspects. They believe in the existence of God, but not necessarily even that Jesus was divine.
something much more mysterious. It's more, you know, the paradox of belief, and here I think you should search for absolute, is that first, we unconditionally want meaning.
Absolutely.
Let me give you an example where I hope we will agree, and I think it's a nice example of ideology today. Why do we eat organic apples and buy them? I think most of us know probably this is to a large extent bullshit, but it makes us feel good.
It is.
You buy organic apples, so
Yeah, organic doesn't really mean anything. The food companies can slap the label organic on anything, and it's just basically a way to overcharge. Non-organic things are generally speaking, almost as healthy. I'm not a complete expert on this, but you know, that's what I've learned from documentaries about the food industry and reading books about it, and a lot of most people who are experts on these subjects seem to agree about that.
Oh my God, I'm doing something great. I'm helping Mother Nature. It's a big solidarity movement.
I'm sorry, I don't buy organic.
Neither do I, my God. No, I like genetic, nice. I want. No, sorry, but let me go on very briefly so that I stop. But at some point, you know what's for me nonetheless the problem, and I appeal here again to you in all this. Listen, let's be clear. Something is happening today, nothing religious or whatever, which may affect the very meaning status of being human. Our very sensitivity, feeling ourselves, doesn't it imply I'm here, I think reality is out there. The moment you can, which up to a certain extent they can already do, I think, directly link to a computer your thinking, so that, for example, you no longer even need the famous Stephen Hawking, but I told my God in London, I saw it myself.
You can control things. He's talking about how you can control technology telepathically. Apparently that's already being worked on, and it's useful in rudimentary ways, and maybe that actually will eventually become mainstream and widely used, or even virtually ubiquitous as cell phones are today. And an example of that is apparently even poor people in third world countries, like some parts of South Africa, have cell phones too.
They presented machine for crippled, I don't know what's the politically correct term, where you just think forward and the machine moves. It's still very elementary, but all these plus genetic manipulations, this is what I see as the real problem, not any metaphysical nonsense of Nietzsche's Übermensch. Something will probably emerge, I'm not talking anything great, which is in conflict with many of very fundamental representations of what we think is to be human.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mentioned Nietzsche's Übermensch. There's a lot of people have heard of that, but for those who don't know, it's the idea of the Overman, or what popular mistranslation of it that he didn't actually say is the Superman. But it's like basically this ideal of the highest person, or like not high like I get sometimes, like smoking weed, but the highest ideal of a person, kind of like Jesus, basically. When you if you read his book, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, that's a fable about a pretty Jesus-like figure from kind of a secular perspective. So maybe it seems like he's kind of saying there that maybe technology will advance to the point where AI will allow us to become become the God that we believe in, or something like that. And he mentions that elsewhere in Less Than Nothing too, that we should kill God, basically symbolically, to become the God that we wish to worship. And he's a Hegelian too, and if I understand it correctly, the phenomenology of spirit is very difficult to understand. But if I understand it correctly, the Hegelian God that Slavoj Zizek seems to believe in is something like how the process through the Big Bang and the process of evolution and the advancement of science, all of these tools will allow us to eventually evolve into, or discover perhaps, the God. So it's like humans are the universe's way of knowing itself, or humans are God's way of discovering itself, which is kind of like that. I'm probably butchering that, but that seems to be an idea, which is really interesting. Anyway, I think that's really interesting that basically Slavoj Zizek is arguing that in a way Christianity are atheists, in comparable to a way that people, many Christians in some places, or perhaps most of them, do not see Jesus as literally having existed as a divine being, maybe as a mortal man, but not as a divine being, and not necessarily that Jesus is God, like the Holy Trinity that's more popular in Catholicism than Christianity anyway. Those are kind of the same thing, but they're differentiated in a lot of different ways too. So anyway, that's a really interesting radical idea about Christianity that Slavoj Zizek has. And I'll go to this paragraph in the book Less Than Nothing here, which is related to well, he has many radical ideas about Christianity, but one of his other radical ideas of Christianity that it's basically feminist. So I'll read this here and comment on it. All right, so in Lacan's formulae of sexuation, non-all designates the feminine position, a field which is not totalized because it lacks the exception, the master signifier. I'm not going to explain all of these concepts because it's a lot to get into, but he uses a lot of really complex philosophical terms, and it's good to look all of these up. But anyway, applied to Christianity, this means that the Holy Spirit is feminine, a community not based on a leader. The shift to feminine occurs already in Christ. Christ is not a male figure, as many subtle leaders have noted. His strangely passive stance is that of feminization, not of male intervention. So, because he's more passive, he can be seen as more of a feminine figure psychologically than a masculine figure. Christ's impassivity thus points toward the feminization of God, if you see Christ as representing God. And that's the argument that Slavoj Zizek turns on its head to say that Christians are atheists as well, in a way. His sacrifice follows the same logic as that of the heroine of Henry James' Portrait of a Lady, or of Signe de Coufontaine's In Claudel's L'Otage. I'm not familiar with those, but Christ is not a master figure, but the object, the object A, occupying the position of the analyst, an embarrassing excess, answering questions with jokes and riddles that only confound his listeners further, already acting as his own blasphemy. I like that. So it's also this idea I alluded to earlier of this idea that he gets from Lacan, who was a psychoanalyst, of Christ as a psychoanalyst, and not a very good one by the sound of it, uh, answering questions with jokes and riddles, and that basically acts as him acting as his own blasphemy, as he said. So yeah, that's really interesting. I thought that was another really interesting idea that Slavoj Zizek has about Christianity in this video, that in the way he's describing, you could say that Jesus was, from a psychological perspective, very feminine in many ways, and by association, God was too. Probably not the Old Testament God in particular, maybe the New Testament God more specifically, but mostly just because the feminization of Jesus from a psychological perspective can be applied to God as well. Because even if you don't believe in the Holy Trinity, that Jesus is literally God, Jesus is the Son of God, and he's very similar to God in many ways. So you could say that if God created Jesus to represent him on earth, then God could also be seen as psychologically feminine in that similar way, in being passive and listening to people and being kind of like this oracle prophet, talking to people's in riddles and making jokes and stuff. And I like this kind of more hippie version of Jesus, and he seems to have been that way in many ways in the Bible, which is why I think Jesus is an admirable figure, even though I myself as an atheist. And that's why I find these theological concepts to be very interesting too. And Slavoj Zizek's takes on subjects are always interesting, whether I agree with them or not. And he has some really interesting, radical, and somewhat paradoxical views, as he would say, on Christianity. So yeah, I hope you found that interesting, talking about Slavoj Zizek seeing Christianity as feminist and atheist. And yeah, look forward to my next video on this series. Check out my last book video on a book that I did, which is another one, I believe it was Rule 4 of Jordan Peterson's new book, Beyond Order. And check out new videos coming out. Check out the one I did yesterday, which was about the progressive populist political commentator and YouTuber Crystal Ball going on Bill Maher's show and destroying all of his basically pro Russiagate arguments. And yeah, all my future videos, more book chats to come, more about trending topics and people getting into interesting political debates, and probably going to finally do that movie chat on Taxi Driver starring Robert De Niro, directed by Martin Scorsese, and which is one of the first movies about incels and mass shooters and PTSD in the Vietnam War. So look forward to that too. Be doing that with Dusty and Chris. And yeah, thanks everyone for watching. Click that like button, subscribe to the channel, click that bell to be notified when I come out with new videos. Check out my Patreon page, which is in the description of the video as always. 1, 5, 10, $100,000 a month, any amount is greatly appreciated. And I always forget to mention this. If you pay $10 a month, you get to vote on future topics, books, and movies that I will discuss both by myself and with others. So that's an incentive to give me money on Patreon. All right. Thanks again, everyone. And like I always say, I love you all, keeping the tiny beam of light that shines through the almost impenetrable darkness in the universe. And most importantly, always remember this: the funk cures all, and groove is in the heart, and Christianity is feminist, and Christians are atheists. All right. Adios until next time, everyone.